Perfect. Thank you. All right. Caring for your internal needs. This is take 3. I am excited to talk about this today. This is kind of a hard topic for a lot of people. It is can be very, very triggering. And so I just want to open with saying, if you feel very, very triggered while we're talking about this today, feel free to take a break. You can step away from your device. You can mute it. You can just kind of zone out a little bit. I'll talk to Jesus. That's always a good thing to do if you're triggered. Whatever you need to do, it's completely fine. Most everything will be covered in the booklet that you can read it later. And as I mentioned in the email, if the recordings work okay, then I will send those out. That's another kind of downside of switching devices, is this one just doesn't have as high a resolution for recording. So we'll see how that goes. One of the reasons that caring for your internal needs is so hard is because those who have suffered with trauma and with abuse were never taught to do that. It was never modeled for them. That's kind of, as kids growing up, so much of what we learn internally is modeled by parents, and it's modeled by caregivers or school teachers or people that are around us. And that's how we learn a lot of it, not by someone telling us or reading a book. Because as we all know, people can tell us things, but if they model something different, it definitely dilutes their message a bit. When it comes to this concept of self-care, we really need that modeled for us so we can kind of absorb it. And when we talk about how it should be modeled in people being able to feel their emotions and process their emotions. When you see a parent be really sad, cry, and then be okay, then that sends all the signals to your nervous system and to your brain that says you can be sad, cry, and then you can be okay. When you never see that model, you never learn to care for yourself in that way. And in fact, you learn the opposite. You learn about shutting those emotions down. In the same way, taking breaks when you get overwhelmed. That's another way that we model self-care. Self-care can be modeled in how the relationships that we choose. When someone is not a safe person, how do we set boundaries? Setting boundaries is a way that self-care is modeled. So there's a lot of different ways that that can be modeled for us growing up that we just kind of absorb and learn. But if you have dissociation, if you have a trauma coping system, then you typically don't have a lot of self-care resources because they were not allowed. In many cases, they were often penalized if you tried to do self-care, if you tried to tend to your own emotions or express your own emotions or set a boundary. Those things were just not allowed. And so it's very, very hard for self-care to happen. And beyond that, and this is really important, those of you that deal with dissociation understand this. Those of you that don't, but you're just here to learn and grow, it's really important for you to understand that not only is self-care very hard for people with a trauma coping system, it can also be very triggering. It can just feel unsafe because it at some point in their life was unsafe. And so it's important to approach the topic with caution. I'm going to throw my pet peeve about self-care out here for you guys right at the get-go, and then we'll jump into some of the material. Self-care today is really, I'm trying to think of a nice word. Self-care today is, okay, there's a good one. Self-care today is very patronizing. I don't like how most of self-care is talked about today. So it's relaxing and it's doing fun things and it's take a long walk and it's buy something fun for yourself. And it's all the joy things and the fun things. And that is certainly an element of self-care. So I don't want to say that that's completely fraud. It's an element of self-care, but I say it's patronizing because that's not what most of us need for true self-care. We need to do the hard things. Like self-care is letting ourselves cry. It's letting yourself be angry. It's thinking about that really awful thing, maybe trauma, maybe just embarrassing, maybe whatever, this really awful thing that either happened to you a long time ago or that happened at the office last week, allowing yourself to think about it, process it, and work through it, that is also self care. And often, when self care is talked about in our society today, the hard things are not talked about. Every once in a while, you may see a meme that has the hard things in it. But for the most part, it's all the fluffy things. And so, when we're talking about self care today, there's going to be some fluffy things, but there's also going to be a lot of the hard things that we have to deal with when we are dealing with dissociation and when you're healing. So, one of the important points about self care, and there's a lot of different words you can substitute in here, safety, healthy living, comfort. I find that the least triggering term is self care. And so we kind of land on that one. A couple of the reasons why it's important. One is without a good sense of self and what we need, it's very hard to live in the present moment. So, living in the present moment requires a sense of self awareness. And when we start to be very self aware, especially if you are dealing with dissociation, your needs are one of the first things that you become aware of. And truthfully, that is, again, very triggering and kind of turn people off very quickly. But when we don't live in the present, there's some drawbacks to that. I think we were designed to live in the present. The present is where we experience the most joy and connection with other people. Um, when we live in the present, there are fewer memory issues. So that people with dissociation and with a trauma coping system, they go through their day. Of course, their body does, but their primary self is not going to remember every part of the day. Their parts won't remember every part of the day. It's going to be very scattered in what the memories are. And part of that is because there's not a strong sense of living in the present. When we live in the present, then we are more likely to remember what's happening in the present, to enjoy the present, and truthfully, full disclosure, to feel the pain of the present. But as we talk through today, I hope that you can see how you can build some skills to be able to handle even the pain in the present. One of the things that people often say is, well, I can't live in the present. I can't tend to my needs because my past holds me back. Totally true. When you have something that's very traumatic or very hard that happens, it sticks. It's like your brain sticks in that moment in time and you feel it often. Whether you know it or not, you feel it often. The emotion of it is often present. The feelings may come in different body pains, frequent headaches, dizziness, pain in your knees and your hips, muscle tension up here. When we start to feel those body pains, and there's not a clear reason that's attached to the present why we're feeling that, then very often it's emotional pain from the past that's stored up. So it makes sense why you wouldn't want to live in the present, because then you got to feel the stuff from the past. And so the past can be very hindering in that way. But again, that's something to work through. It's not something that should be a total block to you. It just takes a lot of patience and a lot of time. What I'll also hear is, well, the future stresses me out. Like if I live in the present, then I kind of have to plan for the future. I have to think about the future. And that's hard when you have a history of trauma and abuse, because the future is like a field of landmines. Like you don't know, what if this happens and what if that happens, and this has always been my experience and I never want that to happen again. And just the thoughts of what could happen can be very overwhelming. And so then people struggle to stay present, to live in the present. But the reality is, living in the present is the only thing that truly equips us for the future. That's where we build our skills to handle whatever may or may not come in the future. It's a slow process, and you have to be very, very, very patient. Be very patient with yourself, very patient with the people that you work with, because it is slow and it can be very scary for them. That's okay. That's okay. You just go slow. You just kind of keep moving. And breaks and rest periods and that is okay too. But living in the present is going to equip you better. And that's where you're going to find the peace that so many of you want and are looking for. So the first step in this sense of self-care is, like I said, an awareness of what you're feeling, of what's happening with you. We talk about that in the sense of self-regulation. God designed us in amazing ways, and our nervous system is really wired to indicate whether or not we are in a good place, whether we've gone to the distress, dysregulated, fight or flight, or freeze state, or whether we're in a I'm emotionally regulated and I'm present and I'm connecting with those around us. I don't know if we'll go deep into emotional regulation because there's a lot to cover today in the next few days, but I'm going to thread it throughout today and the next two classes that we have because it's really important. When our nervous system becomes dysregulated, there's some things that, well, what that does when you have a trauma coping system and your nervous system becomes dysregulated. So, what I mean by that is there's something that's happening in your environment most often, or it could be something that's kind of coming to your mind. Um, when that happens and it's something that's very unsettling, then your nervous system sends signals to your brain that says there's danger. We do the brain, the hand is the brain, and we kind of do the brain symbol that this is your prefrontal cortex. So I often go like this when I'm talking about your prefrontal cortex. It's where you live when you are in the present moment, when your primary or your host or your core self is living your life. You're living out of the front of your brain, your prefrontal cortex. Well, God designed us. Every person back here in their brain has an amygdala. That'll be my thumb here in this demonstration. And the amygdala is always looking for safety. Is it safe? Is it safe? Is it safe? And so if we have a stressful thing happen in our environment, and we're maybe triggered by something. So somebody has a little bit of a tone, or even that person may look a little bit like your abuser, or maybe you just have certain patterns of relationship that always seem to end destructively. And so you start to see that pattern happen. Anything around you that may indicate something connected with trauma or may indicate a danger in the future. What happens is the amygdala gets triggered and the amygdala turns on. When the amygdala turns on, the prefrontal lobe goes off. You, as they call it, flip your lid. When you flip your lid, you're no longer thinking or living up here in the front of your brain. You're now operating in the back of your brain. The amygdala is now in charge, and the amygdala is now working very hard to create safety, 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 safety. So that's great in the situation of imminent danger. So when that happens and your prefrontal cortex goes offline, the reason it does that is so that your brain can respond instantly without you having to think it through. Wait, is this a wise decision? So it's really made for situations like, I think we actually used this example last time, being chased by a lion. If you're being chased by a lion, you don't want to think, wait, which way should I run? You want your feet to just go so that you don't have to think it through. So that's the point of the amygdala and the brain going offline, is so that the amygdala can just access whatever information you have in your brain and just do it, activate. The problem is most of our situations in adult life, whether you're dissociated or not, most of our situations that cause anxiety really require your prefrontal lobe to be online, because you need to think it through. You need to think, okay, is this truly a danger, or is this just something that is a trigger to me? What do I need to do? Do I quit my job, or do I need to stick it out, or do I need to look for another job first? Like, we need to think through the process rather just being impulsive and letting your amygdala make the next choice for you. So self-regulation. So this happens in part when your nervous system is saying there's danger, there's danger, there's danger. And so when we notice, so let's say that when you get triggered, it creates nausea and you just kind of get nauseous and just this icky feeling. Okay, so if you're getting nauseous and you know it was Um, we'll go for it. All right. So if you are nauseous, then what you need to know is, you think it might be a trigger, is that you are about to flip your lid, or you may have already flipped your lid. So whatever you think next is not going to be run through your prefrontal cortex. It's likely run through your amygdala instead. So your perception of what's happening is not going to be through a sense of sound and logic and reasoning. It's going to be through the sense of danger. Danger. It's like switching out glasses from clear glasses to blue tinted glasses. You're going to see everything through a different perspective. And so it's very important in that moment to use some of these self-care techniques and these grounding techniques to get your brain back online before you make a decision about what happens next. It's a beautiful way that God wired us, but it's a way that we kind of have to learn. It didn't get ingrained the way it should. It didn't develop the way it should for a lot of people that grew up with trauma and abuse. So you have to relearn it. Now, because the way God also designed us, we can relearn that at any point in life. So regardless of your age, it's possible. You just got to be patient with yourself. So when you realize that you kind of flipped your lid, you're realizing, okay, I've gotten triggered here. I don't even know why. And that's also very common with trauma coping systems, is people do get triggered and they have no idea why. They just feel anxious suddenly or depressed suddenly, or I suddenly just have this pain and this ache and I don't know why. Because the whole essence of dissociation is disconnect. The reason why you're having the symptom is not always connecting in your brain. And that's also partly why this self-care is so important, because it starts to bring connection in so you can figure those things out. But even if you don't know the reason, you can treat the symptom. You just don't usually treat it medically. Sometimes you do, and sometimes that is important, but you also need to treat it emotionally, and you need to treat it from that mind, body, spirit perspective. So on the next page in the booklet, when to use self-regulation and grounding techniques. I'm not going to go through that list just for time's sake, but it kind of lists some of the things that may happen that would be an indicator to you that you have flipped your lid, that you're not operating in your primary functioning mode, but now you're operating through the amygdala, through that safety zone in your brain. Thoughts and feelings of being inadequate, relational dysfunction, a lot of sleep disturbances, just a different list of symptoms than what you might normally consider to be a trigger symptom. So it's kind of important to look at. And actually, we have a few pages of those. What often happens with DID and with trauma coping systems is you don't necessarily notice it when it happens. So like the sleep disturbances or the relational, extreme relational difficulty, because this flipping your lid, when you get triggered by a tone that somebody has or a situation that happens or even a smell or a color, something that you've seen, this happens so fast. This is, again, it's meant to happen really fast for situations that are imminent danger, which most of us do not live in imminent danger. But sometimes when you have a trauma coping system, it may feel like you do. You can't really judge that well when you're offline. Nobody can. Nobody can. And so what happens is that trigger happens, you go offline, and then you're just functioning out of this strong need for safety. without being able to reason through what you're doing. And so that can actually last for minutes, hours, or days. That can last for a very long time. If you scroll up, there should be a link up above for it's on the Trauma Healing Center website under booklets, and it's called Caring for Yourself. If you go through days and weeks with having your lid flipped, you're going to have a lot of memory issues from those days and weeks. And you're also going to have made a lot of choices out of this need for safety instead of through your prefrontal cortex. And so it's important, even if it takes you days and weeks to notice that you flipped your lid, to be able to bring it back online and to be able to get back to your primary self where you can really think through and reason from that adult perspective. So here's some of the self-care that we do to help prepare for this, because this is one of those skills you don't just learn in the moment. It takes work. Your brain, like I said, this is automatic. So you need to create some pathways in your brain that will help you have some alternative automatic responses. And this is completely possible, and it's way easier than what you think. But there's actually a drawback to it being so easy. People won't do it. So it can feel too easy. And so it feels like that's too easy. That's never going to help me. Like my problem feels this big, and you're telling me to do this one little thing that's going to help my huge problem. No, I can't. I won't. It's not worth. I have so little energy. I'm not going to put it in something that doesn't feel equal to the problem. But let me tell you, our Creator, our Heavenly Father, He is amazing. And He knew that in high levels of trauma, we would not have the capacity to do the level of work that matches our problem. So He created our brains with neuroplasticity, big word, that allows us to recreate these pathways in very simple ways. Very simple ways. It just takes practice. It takes a level of consistency. That word can be very scary for people with a trauma coping system, because if you flip your lid a lot, you're like, there is nothing in my life that I do consistently. So I use that word very, very lightly. It doesn't mean rigidly, for sure. God made us so that we can do small things that have a very big impact. And that is really what I want to encourage each of you in with this self-care that we're talking about today. Is the small things over time make a really big, big impact. You got to start though. You got to start. And it's okay if you start and then you just kind of boop, and you're just kind of gone for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks or 6 months. And then you come back and you're like, oh man, what was that thing I was supposed to be doing? Oh, I don't even remember the last time I did it. That's okay. It's okay. Just start again. Just start again. Because your brain doesn't lose what you've already done. It just stacks it. Just stacks it. So it's like putting money in the savings account. If you're like, okay, I'm gonna put $50 in every month, $50 in every month. You do it for 2 months, so you got $100, and then you forget, or you just stop, or other things come up, and it's a year later. You haven't lost that $100, assuming you didn't pull them out. It's still there. You can just continue, and the neuroplasticity in your brain works the same way. You just have to continue. So these are some of the very, very simple things to work in to create this sense of self-care, to create some value for yourself, to help you ground and to help you be in the present. There are 2 different forms of self-care. One is internal and one is external. And both are important to differing degrees based on your situation. Our list of internal self-care things, and truthfully, these lists, I could do hundreds of items on both lists. In the booklet, and what we'll talk about today is just a tiny percentage of things. And most people have to try different things to see kind of what works for them and what helps them to feel more grounded, and what There are a lot of things that are good, but when you have a trauma coping system, there are some things that may trigger you more than others. So we're not necessarily looking for self-care items that don't trigger you at all, because that may be really hard to find, but we don't want a self-care thing that's going to trigger you this much. It's like maybe just a manageable amount of anxiety that you can kind of work your way through. The important thing is just to find a rhythm and find some things that you can do. So when it comes to internal self-care, that connects very strongly into what we talked about last time of communication, being able to do some internal communication. One of the first things that you find when you start that is there's a lot of needs internally, a lot of needs. And it can be easy to be overwhelmed by that, or even to feel like some of them are so childish and they don't match. I'm a 44-year-old woman. This does not match my, yeah, I know, but you need to tend to yourself. And if that's what you need, that's what you need. And so listening internally, like we talked about last time, and writing down what you're hearing is the first step to good internal self-care. Be curious, speak kindly to yourself, really try to understand yourself. When you feel the need to feel, let yourself feel. That is huge self-care. Let yourself cry. So crying, feeling angry, feeling jealous, even feeling fear. It's really good to let those parts of you express those things. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes it's like there's this ceiling right here and you can like feel the emotion coming up, but it just can't get all the way. That's okay. That's just part of your dissociative system that's saying it's not safe enough to feel yet. So we need to cap that off. We're not going to let you feel it yet. And working on this self-care is going to help improve that, so that you will eventually kind of slowly have some cracks in that and slowly be able to feel. But you have to keep trying. It's really important to keep trying. And so be patient with yourself. And if maybe you feel that need to cry, but you just can't, and that's irritating, I'll totally give you that. Do some other things about crying. So maybe you draw a picture of a little girl or a little boy crying, or maybe you write a story about a sad little kid, or maybe you get real crazy, get an eyedropper with water in it and like literally just drop it, like drop some teardrops down your window, facing outside, just to kind of, these are all like subtle ways that we say, this is okay. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have tears. That's safe to do here. For many people who are dissociative, that was not safe to do growing up. But as an adult, assuming you've taken care of some of this external self-care, that should be safe for you to do, especially in the privacy of your own home or even in your car when you're out driving by yourself. Give yourself permission. And some of those visualizations and those activities help to give yourself permission to feel. It's a very important part of self-care. Honor the no's. Internally, you're going to hear no to some things. I do not want to do that. Now, you can't comply with all of the no's. I do not want to go to work today. I do not want to feed the kids today. I do not, whatever. There's some things that we just have to do because we're adults. We can still honor the no's. By honoring them, we're acknowledging them and we're having an internal conversation about them. Yeah, I know this is hard. Truthfully, I don't want to get up and go to work either, but we really have to go to work because this is how we pay for where we live. Whatever your dialogue is, you honor the no by engaging with it and not just shutting it down. Don't want to listen to it. That is not self-care, because that no is a place in your own heart that is expressing a need. You need to listen to it. It's really important. Celebrate mistakes and successes. Now, I'm realizing we have 15 minutes left. We're not going to do Q&A today just because of the technical issues. So if you have questions, you can email me and we'll include them in next time. Celebrate mistakes and successes. We're going to talk more about this one in the upcoming weeks, but it's really important that we try to loosen up a little bit our grip on this fear of failure. And that is a whole lesson in and of itself, because that's really, really hard. But truthfully, mistakes are part of learning. Failing is part of learning. And we have to celebrate the effort. So that's really what we're celebrating, is the attempt. I tried to listen internally. Melissa said it's important. I just can't. It's too scary. It's too big. There's too much happening in there. That's fine. I love that you tried. I celebrate that with you, because that's a really big deal. The failing part, that's kind of whatever. You tried, and that is a big deal. And we need to celebrate that for ourselves. That's an important part of self-care. And also our successes. Sometimes that can be equally hard to celebrate, because we don't want to get an ego or a big head or be prideful, or I don't want to celebrate my success, because then what if I fail next time? If you fail next time, it doesn't diminish your success this time. So it's a whole mindset, but it really helps to honor your heart. It helps to honor your efforts, your growth, which is never steady. Growth is always like this. It's never steady. And so we want to honor that process and honor the efforts. Listen well internally. Reading children's books can be a really good way to provide some self-care. When you're dissociative, a lot of those parts internally are children. They're very young, and you really need to respond to them at the age that you are. It's interesting. A lot of, I would say most all, but I'd really have to think hard. So we'll just say most of the dissociative clients I've worked with are really great with kids. They're great as parents, they're great as teachers, they're great with their nieces and nephews. Even though they grew up with really rough childhood and didn't have that model, they've acquired some skills, and they're really good with external children. You got to apply those skills to the internal children. And I tell you what, that breaks down denial like crazy, which is important. Read a children's story. Those children's stories, a lot of those books are written in a way to provide skills at a really basic level. And when you're able to read them to yourself, or listen to an audiobook, or whatever you can do, it does help those littles in your heart start to grow and start to learn and get some of the skills that they didn't have growing up. Doing the grounding technique. So focusing on, where am I? What is the date? Kind of feeling the ground under your feet. We're not going to go through grounding today. There's a second booklet on that same website that's about grounding, so you can kind of read through some of the details on that too. That is also showing some self-care, because it's saying I'm valuable. I want to be here. I want to live my life. That is really expressing value to yourself, to say I want to be present. Distracting yourself. So doing something, I don't feel like having fun. I don't feel like doing anything, but I know there's this one thing I like. So maybe do it. You don't have to feel the fun. You don't have to feel the joy to do something fun. Sometimes that actually helps move you into a fun place. Sometimes it just moves you a little bit farther out of the sad place. And here's the kicker. Are you ready? Sometimes it actually moves you deeper into the sad place. But that's actually a really good thing, because then maybe you could cry. Remember those tears that were blocked off? A little self-care, moving you from sadness into a fun activity, may be just enough to relax yourself, so that the tears over here that were blocked up can actually flow. So it's actually a really positive thing if you're trying to engage in fun and it ends up releasing some of these bottled up emotions. That's self-care. It's saying, okay, I did something for myself that relaxed myself enough, that allowed me to trust myself enough, that some of this emotion can come out. You've got to flow. You got to flow with what you're feeling and what you need at the moment. And don't put it on a schedule. Don't put it like a rigid schedule on a list of expectations of what you see in other people, because other people are just showing you what they want you to see. And again, that's another talk, so I'll just leave that there for the moment. Create visualization. So I do a lot of imagery work when I work with people who are dissociative. They tend to be very image driven inside, have a safe place there. It's not a place where we go into denial and where we ignore all the bad things, but it's a place where everyone can just be together, and maybe a place that brings you some peace. Invite Jesus to be in that place with you and just feel some internal peace, even if it's just for a moment and just in that place. It's starting to build pathways in your brain of safety, of self care, and of being present. And that is huge. Create a schedule. So we don't want the rigid schedule, but we do want to kind of have a routine. And sometimes, if you have a lot of memory issues, you do need to have that written down and posted on your wall, or on your device with an alarm that goes off that says time for an internal meeting, or it's time to do something fun, or it's time to give yourself some space to process that really hard memory. It's time to do some self-care. One of the things that I encourage, I think it's later on in here in the routines, is a self-care box. And that's really helpful for especially someone who has a lot of littles, which again, most people with a trauma coping system do. Just have a box that maybe you keep under your bed or you keep in your car, whatever, that you can pull out that has all the things they love in it. So some stuffed animals, a soft blanket, maybe the favorite children's book, some crayons, some paper, bubbles to blow, just some fun things that would be self-care for little kids. Because as you're building trust internally and as you're caring for yourself, you're telling all of your trauma coping system, you know what? I can care for you. I can care for me. Couldn't do that when you were a kid, that's fine. But now, remember how I mentioned most of my people I work with are really good with kids? You got to parent yourself. You have to be the parent to yourself so that those littles and every part of your system can start to relax a little bit and be like, okay, maybe we can trust. Maybe we can trust ourselves. That's a really important place to start because we're being heard, we're being listened to, we're being responded to in a positive way. So you build that internal trust, that will be a game changer for you in your healing journey. For those of you, because I know there are people on here that are not dissociative and some that may just be learning for your own sake, this is important to find the things that are important to you. Maybe it's not little kid things, maybe it is, but to meet those inner needs is really important. So let's talk about external self-care for a moment. External self-care just has to do with really boundaries. It's a lot of boundaries and creating safe environments. So setting boundaries in relationships, setting boundaries in your heart in relationships. Sometimes you can't just end a relationship, especially if it's a boss or a coworker, maybe a neighbor. And so you have to work on, how do I set healthy boundaries? Talk with your counselor, your pastor, someone that knows about boundaries, and say, okay, this is a tricky situation. I want to set healthy boundaries and be honoring to myself. How do you recommend I do this? But then there are other times when we really could just end a relationship. So maybe it's a friendship or even an abusive family member. And there are times when we do need to just terminate a relationship because it's not safe. So we need to work on those external self-care as well. Creating a safe and comforting environment in your home. Sometimes that's not always possible, again, when you live with family members who may not have a lot of health themselves. But if it is possible, create your home in a way that is comfortable and that's safe, because that is an external clue to safety, which is really important for your system to know they're not living in trauma anymore. Finding your voice, learning things that you like and things that you dislike. All of these can be really challenging when you have a trauma coping system, but they're so healthy for you. And again, they're building pathways in your brain that say, I am valuable, I'm worth it, I'm worth something. I don't know what yet, but I'm worth something. I can trust myself. Amygdala, or as we call her sometimes, Amy, does not have to run my life because I, as my primary, I'm working out of the front of my brain and I'm thinking through things now. And not only am I working to create safety externally and internally, but I'm also getting stronger by creating these pathways in my brain. I'm getting stronger so that if things don't work out, I can handle it better and I can recover quicker. Because that's our goal. Our goal is truthfully not to eliminate every bad thing in life. That's just not possible because things happen. However, God made us so that we could be strong enough to handle the things that happen. And doing the self care, the internal communication that we talked about last week, is really important to build that strength. And as you build that strength, your confidence will grow too. And that just lets your whole trauma coping system relax, which lets your nervous system relax, which lets your brain function as it's supposed to, and allows you to have a life that has some more substance and quality to it than maybe what you're experiencing right now. So I'm going to go through this last page before we wrap up. It's just building a routine of self-care. And this is super important. I put it in really bold letters right at the top, so I want to make sure everyone gets this next statement, okay? We do not recommend that you attempt all of these suggestions, because if you do, you will probably fail, because I would fail if I tried to do a full routine like this, just boom. I think that's just normal for all of us. And then you'll get discouraged, and I don't know if you'll try again. Just pick one or two things. That's all we're saying. Pick one or two things on the list, and remember, consistent for you may look completely different than consistent for someone else. Consistent for you may be every time I think of it versus every day or every week. You just have to find a rhythm that's good for you and that meets you where you are. And hopefully that rhythm builds over time. This is not something we rush, because if we rush this, guess what? That's not self-care. If we rush it, then that's just pressure and pushing, and we don't need any more of that. The point of all of these things is to help you be able to relax and take care of yourself, not to put more pressure on. Pick one or two things. Daily, weekly, practice appreciation. Utilize the internal communication skills we talked about last week. Engage in an enjoyable activity. That could be a self-care box. That could be going somewhere fun. That could be treating yourself to ice cream. Just something that you know tends to bring you a little bit of a smile at least. Read a child's story or watch a child's show. Exercise is really good. A nurse friend of mine always says, move a muscle, move an emotion. And so being able to even do the smallest amount of exercise is good for your body, but it's really good for your brain. Try to get sleep, a good amount of sleep. Develop a healthy eating routine as best as possible. Regularly schedule weekends just for rest or fun or emotional self-care, which remember can be pain. Who wants to schedule pain? Yes, I did just tell you to do that. Who wants to schedule pain? Well, this weekend I plan on being in the depths of despair. Sometimes you got to do that because you want to validate those emotions. And most importantly, they're stuck in here. You want to be able to give them space to come out. And like we talked about, you could have that ceiling. They're not coming out easily on their own. So you may have to schedule a day or a weekend to say, okay, I'm going to be drawing pictures. I'm going to be reading stories about sad kids, child appropriate stories. Don't read an adult story about that if you're trying to engage with yourself. I want to give myself permission to feel. That may need to be scheduled in a chunk of time. But when you do it, you will actually come out of it feeling better, probably exhausted, but feeling better. Sometimes that can be scary because you don't want to let it loose. You feel like it'll never turn off, but it will. It'll be hard, but it will. You'll be able to move back into rest because that's what our brains are designed for. Assess your current need for healing and growth and take steps towards these goals. And so that internal communication that we talked about last time is just setting the foundation to come into this self-care and to be able to figure out, okay, what do I need? What do I like? Where do I need to start setting boundaries? Make some notes. If it feels overwhelming, that's okay. You don't have to do all of it all at once because that is way, way, way too much. What we're going to pick up on next time to kind of build on this is talking about what to do when the needs contradict each other. So if you have a performance part that's highly driven to work and you love your job, and then you have and that's what they need to do to feel adequate, to feel confident, they need to go to work. And then you have another part that's like, I need to lay in bed. I can't do anything. I don't want to go to work. Please, please don't make me go to work. We're going to talk over the next couple of weeks of what to do when the needs contradict each other. One of the things I want to throw in here before we wrap up is when the need is something that maybe doesn't feel like it's healthy or a good choice for you. So maybe the need is, I'm going to eat a lot of sugar. I really want sugar. I want candy, but you're a diabetic. Or maybe the need is, I need to really voice my emotions because I'm so angry, but that comes with a load of swear words. And you're like, swear words? That's not good. That's really bad. Like, what do you do when those internal needs don't match your belief system? Now, we're not talking about safety needs. So we're not talking about self-harm. We'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks. We're just talking about this conflict internally that says I need two different things, but what I need doesn't match my values, or how I'm expressing myself doesn't match my values. That's okay. You kind of have to think, again, you have to go to thinking about those parts of you as children, not as adults, because they are children. And if I have a child that's so angry and all he's ever known is swear words, and he comes in and he's swearing at me, don't look at him as a heathen sinner that needs his mouth washed out. That's awful. It's awful, awful, awful. And I'm so sorry for any of you that experienced that, because even as I said that, I'm like, some of you experienced that as a kid, and that's awful. That is just the only way that those parts of you know how to express themselves. It's the only way that they know how to get self-care. So you work with that. You be like, okay, this is how much we're going to do, or this is maybe a limit we're going to set, especially if it's a health thing like candy and being diabetic. You work with yourself and you be patient with yourself. This is not a dictation of who you are, whether you're good or bad or sinful or not. This is just children parts that are learning how to survive in a healthy way. They've never known that before. So I just want to reiterate as we wrap up, be patient. Be very patient with yourself, because this journey is long and hard. It's not going to look like someone else's. Please don't compare yourself to the people you see around you. I know that's a natural thing. We all do it to a degree. It's just not always accurate, and it's generally not helpful. And so be patient. Listen, cry, distract, play, care for what you have, what you need inside.